Hi, and welcome to Creative Encounters, a podcast dedicated to curious conversations with artists, cultural entrepreneurs, and creative thinkers. I'm Chibuye, also known as Art Gallavant, and I'm your host. Today, I'm delighted to be in conversation with the brilliant minds behind Bog Bodies Press, an independent design-forward publishing project grounded in care, collaboration, and resistance. The project is founded by Lilou Angelrath and Réiltín Aodhagáin. At Bog Bodies, the belief is simple and radical. People are born storytellers. They hold that story as drivers of change that belong to people, not to literary institutions. Traditional publishing, with its limits, often overlooks vibrant, moving, and brilliant stories. Bog Bodies is committed to creating a platform that amplifies and shares these voices within and beyond their community. Their publishing practice has welcomed stories for a while now in all different forms. Transcribed audios, translations, and experimental writing are all included in their publications. They don't pretend to be all-knowing. Instead, they invite readers into stories that are engaging, accessible, and deeply human. And I'm so excited to have you on to talk about your project. Welcome, girls.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. That was such a good intro.
Yeah,
You said everything. We can go.
And we just got started. So yeah, I'm so glad to have you on the podcast, as I said. And also for the reason that just for the variation and diversity of creatives that I encounter that I just find so fascinating. Never would I've thought of publishing myself. Yeah, you've taught me, or through you, I've learned so much about what publishing can look like. But I will start the conversation, as I always do, with how we encountered. This is a little trick to see if you remember, but also to tell the audience how it is that we met.
We met right here.
Like 10 meters from here.
Very fittingly in a library.
Very fittingly.
But here at Muntpunt in Brussels, we met during a kind of reading circle.
It was a discussion on a book.
By Charlie Porter.
What artists wear.
Yeah, Charlie Porter, who's now actually one of my favorite writers.
Incredible.
Yeah, such great work. But that is true. We met in Muntpunt, which is, I think, one of the coolest libraries I've ever been to.
It's incredible.
I was telling the girls, I grew up as a library kid, and if the library looked like this when I grew up, I would never leave. And I already was there quite a long time.
Yeah, no, it's such a great, and also the cultural program they have here is phenomenal.
Exactly. And it's thanks to this culture program that we actually met. Like many people in Brussels, I'm always looking to go to fun events and meet like-minded people. And in this case, Muntpunt had organized, in collaboration with Passaporta, a conversation around the book by Charlie Porter, which is What Artists Wear. Yeah, I like artists. Yeah, it was a very fun book, but also its content allowed us to talk a bit about how fashion and artists are connected. That kind of brought a story of how to identify via your clothes.
Yeah.
Now, I brought to some really interesting conversations, but I think that's what it was. We always end up somehow in a circle with you. And whatever you said, I was like, yeah, I second.
Yeah. And yeah, I found that you have a publishing house, and they're just so casual about it. Like, yeah, we have a publishing house. And I was like, wait, what? You're like younger than me.
But yeah, we gave a workshop during the literature festival as well, which was at the same time that Charlie Porter was actually giving his talk.
Well, he was fantastic, but also your workshop was phenomenal. So you're not just a publishing house, but you also organize events for people to tell stories and write stories together.
Yeah.
Before I get into the content of what you do, just a little bit of a background. I also found out that your origin is in design, which I was like, what the hell is that?
We met actually at the Design Academy Eindhoven.
Right.
In the Netherlands. And we started Bog Bodies Press at the beginning of our final year there.
It's always trying to, I guess, push the limits of like what design is and what it's understood as by the public. So you have a lot of freedom in that school. There's no way. It's very vague and it's just very open. And at the end of the day, to be fair, we do actually graduate with a degree of applied arts.
Because this understanding of design and just making things is not what you do. And I've learned so much in the meantime about design, but the idea that there's forms of design that are intended to create texture, create meaning, and in some way subversion. Is that how you would view your translation of design thinking in your practice?
In the school, you basically choose studios, so it's very open. But the one that we were in was a very odd one, which was called the Invisible Studio. And so the goal of it was to analyze the design of systems so that then you can operate outside of them or kind of appropriate them for yourself. And I think that that was really formative in our approach to design, where design is also a tool for research and for understanding. And for us, it also helped us to see design as something that is so closely linked with content. It's not just, the design of furniture is one thing, which is also great. My parents sell furniture in Ireland. It was where I started, I suppose. But it is this it's a very different approach to it, where for us, design is something that we consider a lot with publications because it's a way for us to amplify the stories of our contributors and to show people that they're worth reading. So to attract attention to something they might just look past first and hold it long enough for them to realize how good the stories are.
I'm wondering to what extent that aligns with this idea of critical design.
To be honest, we were in that school a long time and I'm still thinking, what is critical design? It's such a broad field.
And it's very tough because I feel like even if you try to approach or if you build your practice on critical design, it can become very easily just like what Réiltín was saying earlier, like design for designers, and you get very easily stuck in this quite academic, jargony echo chamber, and it doesn't really involve a lot of people outside of that. And if you're trying to be critical of design in the world, you have to get out of that bubble.
But there's this element, what you're saying, that critical design is that you're critical about the world, and hence you see the designer then sees themselves as somebody who can change the world.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, critical design is also very rooted in analysis, in-depth research, and then looking at design as a way of intervening. I don't know if it's necessarily always seen as a way to change something, but it's intervening in a certain context, either to show what's happening.
I would also, to a certain extent, call your practice an intervention. You're subverting publishing. And it's from its traditional form to what you guys do.
I think there definitely are aspects of that kind of critical design practice that we brought in or that we used, especially in the beginnings when we were analyzing the publishing industry and how it works and seeing where we wanted to position ourselves. That kind of research was definitely a huge part of what we did, especially in that first year.
Yeah, we had this thing called the minimum viable method, which is constantly experimenting and testing things and not being afraid to try out things. And so I think there was these two together, which was a constant putting ourselves out there and just trying it out and see what failed. Réiltín often says throw things to the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, it is so true that that's a lot of what we do. It's just we're going to try this, and if it doesn't work, we pivot because we can do so many minimal viable steps every day.
It added up. This was an experimentation during your studies that turned out to be something you're still doing now.
Yeah.
What was it like transitioning from that safety space to now doing it for real? This is a very, very serious hobby.
I think it never really felt like a transition necessarily because we involved people really early in the process, externally. We launched the first issue and it was already, we were publishing people who, most of them were friends of friends or something who had responded to the open call, but already because we had done some research previously in the publishing world or independent publishing world, we had people who posted it on their story or whatever. So we had quite a lot of people who were actually getting involved who didn't know that it was a school project. And so from the start, we had this kind of responsibility to do it right.
Yeah. This serious thing.
Yeah. And it was, I think because of that, we could it's just been building process from there.
And so we were just well, let's just pretend we've basically already done with school and now we're starting for real. And we know it was kind of a trick of the mind, I think, because it's obviously we know we have that safety net, but it was more we're just going to do what we want to do and we're going to find a way to turn it into a project that's going to pass our final.
Yeah. Right, because you kind of jigged the system to be able to do this as a graduation project. Tell me.
So the first semester of the final year is something called, it can be something called free focus, where you pitch a project, they give you half your tuition feedback and you just go for it.
Right.
So that's what we did. It was so good. So that's what we did to start with. And that was a lot of the foundation. So we released the first 2 issues of Nematope, our magazine, and did a lot of interviews with people in the publishing world. So we just had that time to really be okay, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And then the second part is graduation. for our graduation, we presented research on publishing, the independent publishing world and traditional, and our own publishing house. So by that point, we had five issues, and we had released a book. So it was like we had a year where we just essentially for the exams, we would just the week before be like, how do we present what we've done in a way that they'll let us through it? But
I mean, it is a lot of work. So you did do a lot of work to put this together. If you would please tell the audience what Nematode essentially is, this publication that you have.
Yeah, we call Nematode a wide and welcoming platform for the brilliant stories that traditional literature often overlooks. So it's kind of our flagship publication. It's a quarterly magazine now where anyone can submit. So we do a big open call. There's no theme. There's no restrictions on grammar, language, form, pedigree, I suppose, of authors, which a lot of traditional literary institutions use to kind of filter out storytellers before they even get to the gate. So for us, this is basically a platform where we can showcase how phenomenal these stories are, especially the ones that fall outside of traditional literary boundary. Because for us, so many of this is something that we say quite a lot, but if you think of the best story you've ever heard, chances are it was told to you around a dinner table or at a bar or by a friend.
Over a glass of wine.
Yeah, exactly. So allowing more people to have access to that, and with that kind of legitimacy of print is really important, because it's storytelling is the oldest tool we have to be able to connect with other people and to understand the world better and to understand each other better. And so keeping it in this weird transactional landscape that traditional publishing has, it doesn't serve the purpose of storytelling.
Yeah, and so then what was your personal connection with storytelling? You seem very absolute about what it should be or what it can do or the power of storytelling. I've always been fascinated with how well you see this form of connecting with people in its most natural form, just a kind of a one-to-one or a community type setting. How did stories become so important to you, or why?
That's such a good question. I don't think I've asked myself this properly, because I think with like publishing, it makes sense because like, I mean, I'm not Irish, unfortunately, but my upbringing was just incredibly scattered and in between many languages and cultures and all that things. And so I think like stories were like they were just a big grounding force for me, but they weren't like spoken. Like I wouldn't say that like my family are not storytellers. My family loves to be quiet, and I'm Finnish. So there was not as much that storytelling baked into it, but they're like stories were incredibly important, I think, just to me. But the funny thing is, I think like actually, I feel like I really learned so much more about it through like going to Design Academy and meeting Réiltín and another of our friends who are like magnificent storytellers and like will like put on a show. Like we're having dinner and then all of a sudden it's like, wait, I need to tell you this. I'm going to go grab some props as well. And like we're going to do this big thing. And then I was just like, oh my God, these stories in this book are alive and they're really, really important. And I think so. I think I came to the game really late, but I would say like that was it. Like I was just like kind of hit and I was like, oh my God, makes so much sense. And it makes so much sense to have them.
But I think actually both of them, because we still make print publications, like it's not all oral storytelling. And so I think it was this middle ground or like very untapped area for us where there are these incredible stories that benefit so much from the cadence of a real person telling them or from the colloquialisms of the storyteller that get ironed out in print so often. It made sense for us to... Because books were also a huge refuge for me growing up. Like we were both huge bookworms. But then idea, but then it was this idea of like, okay, there's so many more phenomenal stories that people just don't have access to if they're not in circles where people are telling each other stories all the time. And it sounds so general, but all of these like huge problems of isolation, and it's just the way to combat them is to feel connected to other people and to feel close to other people, and that can happen so brilliantly through storytelling. It's such an incredible tool that is only really utilized in a commercial way, in like I can give a really good TED talk or I can give a really good business pitch, but the whole point of it is to connect people in a very real way. And so I think that was really our goal from the get-go, was just being like, how can we create a space that is a little bit welcoming than in other print publications?
Is there with other publications, is there this layer of dishonesty that takes away vulnerability, you feel? Because you also seem to focus on very, honest and raw stories without heavily focusing on refining or defining, but just as felt that it's spoken.
That's a really good question. I think a lot of what happens, so if we look at traditional publishing as an institution, so your Penguins, your Random Houses, all of that, these are such huge machines that a manuscript goes through so many different people before it ever gets to the public. The fact that it will get checked over by an editor, it will get checked probably by another editor, a copy reader. There's going to be the legal team that decides whether that makes sense. There are all of these voices that kind of polish it or carve away at it until it can still be like, we are not against traditional literature. There are so many phenomenal stories, but there has to be another avenue that doesn't have this amount of filtering, because even if you do go through this whole process, before you even get there, there are all of these restrictions that filter people out based on whether they think that the book will actually sell, or whether they think that there's enough demand for that literary trope in the market right now.
Right.
Or whether the author, is it trendy? Does the author have a following already? Are they established? If it's a debut author, how much are we going to have to invest in marketing for them? Like, it is this huge business. And machine that really changes the format of story. So what we're offering is something different, I suppose. And storytelling as well, like especially with Nematode, what we found is that this idea of inclusionary quality does not come at the expense of quality. Like, this is something that we hear so much. Is like, but are they good? Sure, they look nice and it's a good idea, but aren't the stories good? And it's like, we just have a much broader pool to pull from. Once you take away those like restrictions, like highbrow grammar or institutional kind of English or a big CV, once you take those away, you can look at such a wider playing field to find the phenomenal stories that already exist there.
I mean, I've seen the publication. I'm not fussed over uniformity, or because the stories are so good and they're so different from each other, and it's almost crazy to me to think that this is a publication that is, so, democratic in the way that people are just submitting them. And I think people just, somebody just wrote this. What do you mean? Like, somebody just like had this in the back of their head. Like, I, again, as a person who grew up, like, fascinated and enthralled by books, this sense of imagination is what draws you to feeling enthralled. But yeah, it's just so impressive that there's still so much imagination and so much diversity of, creative writing that's actually out there. Which, you so beautifully put in these issues. But I also like that it's not just writing. For me, there seems to be a broader creativity that you allow people to immerse in when they make submissions. And obviously that's because people can also send in drawings, and but sometimes there's also pieces that feel kind of like plays to me, that people in their writing style are kind of directly like creating this world that you're kind of swamped in, and sometimes as quickly as a page or two, and you're like, oh my God, where did I go? So it made me wonder, again, even in the pool of this larger pool that you have, then what are the stories that you're drawn to, and who do you publish for? Like, who do you think of when you're selecting these stories?
Me? Okay. I was like, Ratin's got a great answer to this. No, it's funny because we were kind of talking about it the other day, because the open call for the 8th issue has just closed, so we're in the middle of reading submissions right now. We don't talk about it though while we read them. We read them separately and then discuss. But we realized that, like you were saying with the like maybe the polishing earlier, that there is like something that really pulls us in with just very raw, simple, and kind of absurd observations. And this is like gonna sound quite direct, but there's like so many ways to make that happen. And I think like that is one thing that always like kind of like takes us in. And I think like, we do get like really, really phenomenal writers that come in. And I think like you can just tell like when someone like has like just writes beautifully, they can write about anything, and it just like immediately draws you in, and that's just like an obvious like amazing yes.
But what I also love is that we get, like Lilou says, there's so many ways to have this kind of direct observation, or this very authentic, immediate sense in the storytelling, and whether that's like a creative essay, or we had one which was someone documented the times they woke up for like 2
I was
weeks.
thinking of that.
Yeah. And they wanted to wake up at 8 a.m. And it is literally just a series of numbers. But there's something about the way that it's handwritten on Post-it notes. And so there's something about it that you can identify so strongly with. And I think the good thing, what we have a real ability to do through print is to, when people can see something that feels very small in their life, but recognize it in print, it immediately makes you go like, oh my God, someone else did this. I've been there. Yeah. But also I've been there, but I could be in the book as well. You know, like there's this legitimization of it, which is really interesting for readers as well. But for us, then he came to one of the launches and he was reading aloud like the numbers. So he's going 7:58 a.m. and everyone would be like, yeah. And then he was like, he'd get really small and go 10:30.
Yes, because what I also enjoy about what you do is the launches are another opportunity for people to, not just find out about the publication, but also read live their stories. And I think when you're reading a book, whether, as a child you're reading Harry Potter or like later on you're reading Charlie Potter, you're like world making on your own and you're imagining how this was told or how this went. And there's something comical, gripping, and experimental when you hear the writer actually read the story as they intended it.
Yeah,
it's just like you read it and you think, oh yeah, I think this is how it's done, and then they perform it live and you're like, oh my God.
It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, so with Bog Bodies Press, we aim to be a platform to gather people around storytelling, both on and off the page. So events are a really huge part of that. And the first ones we started with were our launches for the magazine. So for each issue of Nemtope, we have a launch event, which is we have people always come and read from the magazine, but it's also an open mic. So if someone wants to kind of extend the edition live, they totally can do that. But it's always so interesting to hear, once you hear it in someone's voice, it's a completely different experience. It's like, it opens up this world I think there's something about the time boundedness of it as well. When you're sitting there with a load of other people waiting for the next word, you don't know, it gives a whole different, I think it's also a loss of control in some way where you're not the one directing how fast you read, how slow you read. Someone else is doing that. So you can literally only sit there and listen.
Yeah, there is something about it in the spoken form that really, Réiltín and I read also the magazine to each other. Like when it's done, we read it out loud to each other piece by piece. And then it's like something about like even pieces that I would feel like kind of like about, all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I love this so much more, because actually hearing it spoken just really brings all that magic to it. But also recently for the last issue, we also asked contributors to send in like voice memos of them reading their own pieces.
I love that.
I guess it didn't work so well. Hopefully it'll work a bit better the next one, just because I think a lot of people...
We did it a bit last minute as well.
Did it a bit last minute and not so many people sent them in. But the few that we got, it was just it was again the same thing. And I was just like, oh my God, this makes sense. These are your words and you're saying them out loud. And it's like, wow, it took me into that world like tenfold, like really, really impressive. It was really cool.
I keep wondering, I'm always trying to see if I understand what's going on. I'm like, how do they do this? Like, what is their ethos? So I was at the launch and it struck me how much performance also seems to be part of your launches, but also part of storytelling itself. And you also tend to invite people to perform, whether it's reading out their submissions. I just wondered, to what extent is that for you part of like the community building element or the togetherness element? Is that something that you actively engage in? Is there like an ethos behind how performance and creating together in that space does something? Because it did something.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I think when we go back to this idea of storytelling in general, it is this way that you can not only connect with the speaker, but for the speaker to feel like their voice can be heard by people directly. And there's a real magic that happens when we have that space. It's like this container where people feel so heard, and the audience can also imagine themselves standing there, because then after they have a drink with the person who just spoke. And there's this like incredible way that it allows you to bond very quickly with people, because if you hear them stand and talk about their story for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, it's completely different than if you are I don't know, you bump into them at a party or something, it forges things quite quickly. So what we also see is that we have a lot of people coming back afterwards, which is always so fun.
It's always like very surprising also to me because I feel like everyone plays like it, and this is where I'm like, storytelling is indeed innate because everyone plays into the bit really fast. Where like I would say like not that it's a bit, but like the audience is like very supportive and just like very like all ears, like feed me anything and I'll be so happy.
Yeah.
And then like the performer also is like, I'm a performer and really takes that performance like role and is very happy about it. And there's like this exchange where it's like you also realize it. And I think it's also like it goes back to one of the ethos of Nematode of like kind of like blurring that boundary between readers and writers and kind of like being a writer but also being a reader and kind of exactly going in both ways. And I feel like that happens also at the launches where you're like you're listening in but you're like as Réiltín said, and it kind of blurs that thing and both parties are really happy to like switch around and it's very magic. It is magic.
But it's also strange because so many people come and they're like, oh, I'd never perform. Like we've had so many people who the first time speaking to any kind of audience has been at Nematode events. And then they're so nervous and they're like, no, I can't do it. It's not, that's not me. I don't perform. And then they get up and they nail it. Like because it is such a receptive audience because they know what they're coming for. You know what I mean? It's not like they're coming to an opening and then all of a sudden there's some stories and they just kind of waiting to go to the bar.
Yeah.
Like you know what you're coming for. And so it's such an incredibly receptive audience that it always, the start of getting people up is a lot of us being like, okay, it's going to be you and then you and then you, because those first few are always, breaking the ice is a little tricky.
Yeah.
But then after that, there's people who jump up afterwards. Like we've had people there, because a lot of what we have is also often we have translation in the magazine. And so we have a couple of times had people who go up and read with a friend. So they would have written it in Dutch and in English, for example. And then they go up and they read the English part while their friend reads the Dutch part. Or they read one after the other. And there's this beautiful thing that happens with translation specifically where you're like, oh my God, that's the same story written by the same person, but in these two completely different languages. And even when you don't understand the other one, you're listening to it then because you're like, okay, I know what they're saying, but you're trying to connect with it in a way that isn't directly like hearing a story you understand. It's just such a fun space to experiment also with how we listen and how we understand.
It's really impressive to see how stories have such a wider power of connecting, of people learning something new, people seeing something new. But you also seem to employ stories in a sort of urgent future thinking way. You recently gave a workshop, as you often do, inviting people to write, and this was titled Stories of Hope. And you already touched upon how there's also this kind of like external urgency of why stories are needed. Loneliness, you said, for example. I think a lot of people experience this during COVID, but even after, it's become a very conscious thing of understanding that this is a really key part of being alive, unfortunately, in a contemporary world. And so I liked how you use your platform, really activated in the way that now you're giving a workshop titled Stories of Hope. I wondered which other themes or futures seem really urgent to you to collectively or personally like reflect on with the work that you published.
It's a really, really lovely question. I think for us, a huge part of what we do is also with Nematode specifically, but with all of our work, it's about trying to show a wide range of stories without an algorithm. So much of the media we do consume is online, and it's dictated to us either by marketing or media conglomerates or
money.
Yeah, exactly.
Money, yeah.
But I think that that's also why Nematode is so fun, is because we have, for example, in issue 7, we have 53 different storytellers in it from all over the world. So by now we've published throughout the course of Nematode over 265 people from 23 countries across 4 continents. So really people that you would never hear the stories of otherwise. And it's distributed quite widely as well. So what's really fun is that you have this range of perspectives that are just, it's not dictated by an algorithm. And I think that's something that's really urgent for us as well, is being like, how can we create more spaces in print, but also in person for actual connection through storytelling that isn't just on reels.
Oh, exactly. The stories that you have access to do change your perspectives.
Yeah.
They can show you bits of the world, but also bits of yourself. in different places. And it's true that like if you and to be fair, like echo chambers also exist like in a social sense, not just like algorithm. It's like quite a natural, normal thing to do. But I think like really trying to go beyond that and like bring as many like range of people also to like our like to Nematope and our community around storytelling, our events. But I think it's something that's already been happening quite a bit. Like we have such a wide range of like ages already in the magazine, and that's something that also feels very, very important because like that cross like generational discussions and stories I think are also very, very important. Like we do need to talk with each other. We're all on the same planet together. Yeah, so I think just going beyond those algorithm and bringing as many stories from as many people, like forcing all of that together in this big melting pot is definitely a goal for the
And it's also why I categorize your practice as artistic, because there's this need to find something real. To me, an artist is a person who is trying to connect to what is real. And unfortunately, the time that we live in, real stories, like you're saying, don't really, they kind of lose in the competition of the market. And people are so hungry to connect to each other, so hungry to familiarize with each other, so hungry to see something that's not just relatable, but relating to something that feels deeper. Yeah, how much you are aware of wanting that, something that is real.
Yeah, I think it's something that we think about quite a lot. That these real stories lose in the market it's really true. For example, with the design of the magazine, it's something that we try to compensate for. And through Nematope, being able to include such a wide range of voices is always our goal. And to be able to share these real stories from real people. But as you say, in the market, that is often hard to get across. So we use design basically to buoy that up. So by having a magazine that's known for its graphic design, we like have won some awards for it. Then we are able to get it onto bookshelves. And once it's on bookshelves, people can see themselves in it, Our role here is basically just to get it into as many people's hands as possible. Because there is such a hunger for real stories, as you say. Just access into a world where you can hear those and you can take part in it. Like even we've seen with submissions to the magazine, for issue 8, we got double the amount of submissions that we did for issue 7, which is a few months apart. It's like people want to take part. They're phenomenal stories.
And vice versa, you are getting this recognition for how unique your practice is. I also love the idea of subversing design as, just like a catch for people to actually connect to each other. Because yes, we are visual creatures and you do make it look very, very cool. This is why I'm still categorizing you as like critical designer. I was telling you how I recently read this book by one of the alumni for your school, Afonso Matos, who's written this book, Who Can Afford to Be Critical. I learned a lot from the book around of how design can be a tool to actually world build in a way or contribute to human life in a way that's not just aesthetic, but profoundly is trying to change. And I think Nematope does the same thing, or Bog Bodies Press does the same thing. You recently won the European Design Award. So, I feel like we can say that you've successfully subverted design in what you do. What was that like?
It was crazy because we had no formal training in graphic design. We were at the award ceremony. They were just like, we have tricked someone really hard. It was like designers of Meta, like people who are like these huge graphic design agencies. And we were like the only ones who have no training in graphic design. So we were really shocked, to be honest.
Different designers were talking about their practice and their approach to design. And so there's this one person that was like, and sometimes you just have to like really think like outside the box. I think I'm okay with the imposter syndrome nowadays.
I think it really goes back to why I think you're quite unique as creatives. It makes sense. Recently, somebody told me you're the right person to write about art because you haven't been institutionalized in a way that you're just following your creative intuition. Your said eye hasn't been influenced by some specific way of thinking. Would you describe yourselves as artists, as creatives? Like, have you ever thought about where you would put yourself beyond liking what you do?
I don't know that we've ever actually talked about it. I mean, if someone asks me what I do, I say I'm a publisher.
Yeah.
Although that's maybe a bit reductive,
I
but
think it depends who asks me and what I want from them.
More creative.
Yeah, no, I really design academy.
yeah.
No boxes. I always say this, and I only realized actually this morning that this is absolutely not a saying in English. It's a Swiss Army knife saying. It's like we just do so many things and we can wear many hats.
I think that's also the thing with being such a small team. It's just Lilou and I. And so we have to have a hand in everything that happens with Bog Bodies Press, which is so fun. It's really incredible to be able to explore so many different ways of building something, because it started with Nematode. That was the first magazine we ever published. And then we have books and now workshops and a broader range of events. So we have launches, but we also have storytelling supper clubs, and we're working on a storytelling festival in Ireland for the later this year. And so being able to not put yourself in such a clear box of what you do also allows you to just do whatever comes to your mind,
which makes it fun and keeps us going.
Yeah, it's very true.
Yeah, I love how you've rejigged publishing as creative practice, as world making in a way, but also like mirroring to the people, to what we need, which is connection. And you do it so well through storytelling, reflecting on being a creative in the broader sense. This part of your journey, if you've had to think about it, what do you think is why you create things that drive you to continue to create?
I mean, very selfishly, one of the big ones for us is just to get to hear more brilliant stories. So much of what it is just like having more access to more stories that we love, selfishly. But I think thinking further ahead, a huge part of what we want to do is to create more spaces for storytelling off the page as well. So someday we'd love to have an actual space where we can bring people for more frequent workshops, also writing circles or reading circles. Building on this to create a real hub for storytelling in all of its forms, print, spoken, music, even just having as broad a platform as possible to bring people together around storytelling and making that something that's stable and strong and can support all of the storytellers that are part of it.
I've always been very at war with myself and like, why do I create? And I think it's something that I tend to do this thing like it's not needed, it's not necessary. At the end of the day, it has nothing to do with us, and it's incredibly fun to create, but it has nothing to do with us. It has to do with all these other people and all their stories and the way that we bring them together and that we can create that space. That balance has been like it's something that just works really well. I think for us,
the ability to build something that we really want to see, something that we think is important and valuable and missing. And I suppose that's the greatest gift of being quote unquote creative is just to be able to build that when you see that it's not there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for speaking to me about how design for you is an inquiry, form of research, speculative, experimental thinking around how to authentically connect people. I love how, in the end, your intrinsic need also seems to be to connect people to community, to self, and your publishing as a creative practice. Thank you so much for
Thank you
coming
for
on.
having us.
Thank you
It's
for
been
having
so
me.
wonderful.
See you soon. Bye.